Here we are in the color page in DaVinci Resolve, and here we have what looks like, to start with, a pretty flat, and you could say boring shot. First thing we're gonna do here is actually add masks. Now, many times I actually will add masks even before I do a basic log correction on it. Many times, if you first add a bunch of contrast to a shot and then try to pull back and recover the highlights and the shadows, it doesn't work as well. So many times I'll first separate the shot and actually basically color grade the sky and the ground separately. So that's what we're gonna do here. I'm gonna add a gradient mask. Let's try to go through this here relatively quick. So for this shot, it was actually shot after sunset, after the sun's below the horizon, so kind of ending up with a little bit pastel colors. So here I'm just turning on, hitting Shift H to turn on mask highlight, so you can see what is selected and what's not selected. What's gray is not selected. So I'm just gonna put this right about here, right on the horizon, and then invert that so I'm selecting the ground. Well, that's not exactly what I want. There we go. So now we have our ground selected, and what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to use the curves tool here to brighten the highlights quite a bit, and then I'm going to pull down the blacks a little bit. Pull down the blacks using my scopes here so that I can see if we don't want to be crushing the blacks right down to the bottom, but we want them to be pretty close to touching. So we're going to go right about there. Maybe back that off a little bit. And then we're going to pull down these midtones a little bit, add a little bit more contrast. Something right about there looks good. Now you can see this still looks kind of flat, so we're going to increase the contrast up to 100. That might be a little bit much. Actually, that looks pretty good. So now we have our first node added, and as you can see, that already looks quite a bit better. So now what I'm actually going to do is hit Option O on my keyboard, add an outside mask, which selects the opposite part of the image. It selects the sky instead of the ground. So now for this, basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to darken it a little bit. Don't want to go too overboard. We'll just go right about there. And by darkening it, we're also adding some contrast because we are darkening sort of the shadow midtone ranges, but not the highlights. And so now I'm also going to add some saturation to that area. Bump that up again to about 100%. That looks pretty good. Now I actually want to add another node in here I'm going to connect the alpha output from the first node to the second node, so I have the same selection on that second node. And I show in Resolve how to do all of this, connect the nodes, and how to use nodes in general more in depth. But basically, these green lines between these green dots, that's where the image flow through these nodes is, and then the transparency flow goes between these little blue dots. So on this second node here, I just want to increase the saturation of our ground a little bit more. I'm going to come back here to this first node and just add a little bit of contrast with the contrast tool, and maybe bump up the shadows a little bit. You don't want to go too overboard here. Okay, so there we go. As you can see, it's a little bit pastel colors, not super punchy. Might depend a little bit on what screen you're looking at it on. But as you can see, that's already quite a significant improvement. Now, I do want to make these colors just a little bit more cinematic. I feel like these greens might be just a little bit too saturated. So I'm going to add another node here, and I'm going to grab, try out a few different LUTs on it. Here's one from my Flying Filmmaker LUT pack. Don't exactly love that, making it a little bit too saturated. I'm going to try out one here from Lutify Me. I actually use the ones in their free LUT pack quite a bit, and link to download that will be in Drone Color Pro as well. Let's see, which one are we going to use here? That looks a little bit too dark. That looks kind of interesting. Here, this has a nice subtle effect, kind of desaturating some stuff, but I don't like that quite that much. So what I'll come over here is to the key panel, and we're just going to turn down our key output to about 0.5. You can also just grab it and adjust it, drag it to adjust it. So I'll just put in here 0.5. And if we pull it up full screen, you can just see that that's just muting some of the really saturated colors a little bit and just giving us a little bit more of that pastel colors vibe. And I think I might go here to our second node and turn up the colors a little bit more, turn up the saturation. And there we go. There we have our first shot color graded. So you can see that is a pretty dramatic difference. So guys, that's it for this video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already so you don't miss future videos. And if you'd like to see another video about how to improve your drone shots, you can click here on the screen, and we'll see you in the next video.